My sister snickered, "You're actually wearing that to your wedding." But I stepped in, draped in white, for stars gleaming on my shoulder. 7 seconds later, 200 sailors snapped to attention, their voices thundering, "Admiral on deck." My family remained seated, but my loyal team, stood tall. My hands trembled, not from nerves, but a cold, simmering fury as I glared at my phone. 200 people waited behind those chapel doors, half of them Navy SEALs in dress blues, and my sister had just sent the most vicious text message on my wedding day. The words scorched the screen. "Charlotte, you're really wearing that to your wedding. Cute. Do they let you salute the cake, too?" Not a single congrats. Not even a good luck, just pure, unadulterated sarcasm, tearing into what should have been the happiest day of my life. Classic Charlotte. I slid the phone into my pocket, refusing to reply. Honestly, what was there left to say? Any possibility of a genuine connection between us had drowned years ago in a sea of biting remarks. Just like this one, in fact, by her standards, this was pretty mild. I adjusted the stiff, perfectly pressed cuffs of my white uniform. The 4 stars on my shoulder felt heavier than usual. Not because I was entering a strategy room or an award ceremony, but because I was walking down the aisle. To my left and right stood 2 men who had been through literal hell and back with me. Hill and Torres. They weren't groomsmen. I never wanted groomsmen. They just showed up and declared, "Ma'am, we're walking you in." No arguments. I didn't make any. Torres, with his prosthetic leg, still outran most of the guys during morning PT. Hill once pulled me out of a chopper crash in Kandahar with his arm half dislocated. They flanked me as if it were a battlefield because in a way, it was just not the kind we were trained for. Miles, my fiancé, was already inside. He was probably calm. He always was. That man could read disaster scenarios like bedtime stories and still sleep like a rock. He was a civilian analyst, quiet but smarter than anyone gave him credit for. And he understood. He never once told me to tone it down or asked if I consider wearing just a simple dress. He said, "We're what feels honest," so I did. The wedding was supposed to be small, just us, the chaplain, a few friends, and some of my team. I didn't send out 100 invitations. They just showed up. No RSVPs, no fanfare, just silent, respectful arrivals in black cars, boots polished like mirrors. Earlier, Briggs from my Yemen unit had simply nodded at me and said, "You walked us through hell. We're not letting you walk down that aisle alone." I don't cry easily, but that one hit different. It's strange, standing still in a hallway when you've led missions, survived ambushes, flown into combat zones. This should have been easy, just a few steps, some words, get married, no live fire, no classified briefings, just vows. But somehow, it felt like the most exposed I'd ever been. I hadn't told Charlotte I was wearing the uniform. I knew exactly how she'd react. She always thought I joined the military out of rebellion, like I signed up just to spite her. The truth is, I did it because I couldn't picture myself anywhere else. But Charlotte never grasped that. She never wanted to. To her, my entire career was just one long, expensive detour from being someone real. She always wanted me to be her +1 in polished dresses at political fundraisers, not standing in briefing rooms next to bleeding men. When I made commander, she shrugged and said, "Cool. Now maybe you'll stop trying to prove something," as if I got a promotion for fun. And now, on my wedding day, instead of silence or even feigned concern, she sent a joke. Because that's what she does when she's uncomfortable, she performs. I reached up, smoothing the edge of my shoulder board. The stars were mine, not honorary, not gifted. I'd earned every last one of them. I'd worn them in war rooms, during base lockdowns. But today I wore them for love. A voice crackled in my earpiece. It was the chaplain. "We're ready for you, Admiral." Hill and Torres both subtly turned their heads towards me. They didn't speak, didn't need to. My heels clicked against the tile as I stepped forward. The weight in my chest didn't come from nerves, it came from 20 years of service. To decades of silence from my own sister. And a room full of men who had every reason not to be here, but came anyway. I passed the chapel threshold. The air inside was still. Then I heard it, one voice. Firm, "Admiral on deck," and every single man in uniform rose. I didn't smile. Not even when they stood. There was a warmth in my chest, sure. But it wasn't joy. It was something sharper. Something I carried since childhood and learned never to show. The first time I realized Charlotte hated me wasn't over a fight or a broken toy. It was at the dining table. I was 6, she was 10. And I had just corrected her on the capital of New Mexico. She kicked me under the table so hard my fork hit the floor. Then she smiled at her mom as if she was proud of me for being curious. That's how she played, sabotage disguised as sisterhood. By middle school, she had mastered the art of silent sabotage. If I got a certificate for good behavior, She'd roll her eyes loud enough for the whole dinner table to feel it if I made the honor roll. She'd accidentally forget to pass on the flyer. And every time she won something, and she always did, she made sure to thank Mom and Dad loudly for raising a real winner. They adored her. Or maybe they were just exhausted. Charlotte was magnetic in public, cutting in private. She'd wear pearls to student council meetings and then casually remind me I was too intense for boys. Once, when I was 15, I asked if I could borrow her black flats for an ROTC banquet. She handed me the box, then told her friends at school I'd worn funeral shoes to a dance. I found out the next day, when someone taped a dead flower to my locker. Mom was the buffer. She'd slip me poetry books, tell me storms made straw birds, not broken ones. Dad was neutral at best. He worked long hours for a defense contractor and treated parenting like a weekend command post. He liked order, silence, and results. Charlotte gave him all three. I gave him questions, attitude, and ambition, not the right kind. Or perhaps the kind he thought belonged only to men. But the moment I truly understood how far Charlotte would go came during senior year. I decided to apply to the U.S. Naval Academy. I didn't ask for her approval. I didn't even tell her until after I mailed the application. She laughed, said, "You in uniform? What are you going to do, yell people into submission?" Then one day my acceptance packet didn't arrive. The academy said my transcripts were never submitted. I knew I'd sent them. I tore apart my room, my email, my folders, nothing. A week later, Mom pulled me aside. She found a sealed envelope with my transcripts in Charlotte's desk drawer. I confronted her. She shrugged. "I didn't think you'd actually go through with it." Like she was doing me a favor. Like she knew better. We didn't speak for 2 months. Not that it mattered, I reapplied. This time making sure everything was tracked and confirmed. When the second packet came, I opened it on the porch by myself. I didn't tell Charlotte. I didn't even tell my parents. I just circled the date in my calendar, packed my things, and left for Annapolis. At the swearing-in ceremony, I stood in a sea of white uniforms, heart pounding, hands steady. I spotted them, my mom blinking back tears, Dad arms crossed, Charlotte in sunglasses too big for her face, chewing gum as if bored to death. She stayed just long enough to snap a photo for her social media and left before the anthem played. That night, she posted it with the caption, "Little sis finally made it to costume camp." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Something shifted that day. The way I saw her. The way I saw myself. She was never going to clap for me. Not in private. Not in public, not ever. And once I accepted that, everything got easier. At the academy, I learned how to eat in 5 minutes, shine boots with spit, and absorb insults without blinking. But none of it was harder than growing up in Charlotte's shadow. That training started young, lasted years, and taught me the most important rule. Respect doesn't always come from family. Sometimes it doesn't come at all. What did come was grit. I wasn't top of my class, but I was close. I didn't win awards for charm, but I led by showing up, shutting up, and doing the work. Charlotte once said I had the personality of a filing cabinet. I took it as a compliment. When I graduated, they called my name, and I stepped across the stage, uniform pressed. Spine straight, my mom cried, Dad clapped once, Charlotte, she wasn't there. I found out later she had her SVPD, booked a flight, then canceled last minute. Because a television anchor job opened up in Dallas, she got the job, I got the silence. I didn't expect more. That was a secret. Lower your expectations, and you stop bleeding from predictable wounds. I learned that young. Learned it at the kitchen table, under polished smiles and backhanded praise. I didn't carry resentment from those years. I carried something cleaner, colder, the kind of resolve you earn when you stop trying to be someone's version of worthy and start becoming your own definition of it. I folded that lesson tight and tucked it into the seams of every uniform I ever wore. I never called her after graduation. I didn't need her to pretend to care. I had a duffel bag, orders for Fort Oglethorpe in Georgia, and one slightly wrinkled photo of my mom tucked between a pack of granola bars and a bottle of aspirin. That was enough. The first thing they taught me on base wasn't tactical or strategic. It was psychological. You're either a presence or you're a problem. I was a presence, quiet, punctual, unshakable, still. Walking into that operations office in my first assignment felt like stepping into a bar, where everyone knew each other and no one wanted a new name on the stool. Especially not mine. You lost, sweetheart. That was the welcome I got from a sergeant who hadn't shaved in a week. His name tag read Danner, his tone read dismissive. I didn't flinch, I just said, looking for the person who signs the logistics clearances. Turned out it was him. That didn't help. My official assignment was Naval Logistics Liaison. Unofficially, I was the person they tested, forgot to invite to briefings, skipped on coffee runs, ignored in the hall. The first few weeks were all sideways glances and inside jokes I wasn't part of. That's how you learn the real structure of a unit. The rank on your shoulder matters less than the way they look at you. When you walk into the room, most of the guys had served together for years. Their jokes were coded, their stories repeated and polished. I was an intruder with a clipboard and a spine that refused to bend. I didn't ask for respect. I acted like I already had it. That irritated them. But I wasn't there to make friends. I was there to keep trucks moving, gear accounted for, missions flowing without a single bullet missing. And I was good at it. My reports were spotless, my coordination airtight. By the end of the second month, one of the lieutenants stopped triple-checking everything I submitted. Progress, even then. I kept my voice low and my eyes open. You learn more from what people don't say. I didn't try to prove anything, just showed up before everyone, stayed after, and left no room for questions. I knew what they called me behind my back. Quota, Icebox, Miss Naval Barbie. They thought I'd crack eventually. Instead, I reorganized the entire depot in 3 weeks and cut shipment errors by 40%. When the colonel asked who did it, Danner tried to take credit. I let him. He knew everyone did. The next day, he passed me a mug of burnt coffee and said, "Not bad, Brennan." That was the first unofficial handshake. Meanwhile, Charlotte had started anchoring morning segments in Phoenix. Every time I turned on the television in the mess, there she was, perfect lighting, perfect hair, a fake sincere voice as she read headlines between fitness ads and weather reports. One night, a guy from my unit pointed at the screen and said, "Hey, isn't that your sister?" I nodded. He grinned and said, "No offense, but damn, she looks like the type who's never done a hard day's work in her life." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. She had lights. I had grit. I worked at base for 18 months. No disciplinary issues, no broken protocols. By the end, they weren't just tolerating me. They were asking for my input. I wasn't loud. I was solid and in the military. Solidity is currency. Then came the letter, not from home, but from Annapolis. A commendation acknowledgement for operational excellence in field logistics. It was the kind of paper that gets you noticed. I pinned it inside my locker. Danner saw it one day and muttered, "Guess you're not just here to warm a chair after all." I wanted to tell him he was late to the realization, but I just nodded and went back to work. When my transfer orders came, Coronado, California, I packed light. One uniform for inspection, one for deployment, and a photo of Mom now creased. In the corner, I didn't call anyone to say goodbye. They didn't expect me to on my last day. Someone had left a note in my desk drawer. No name, just 5 words on a sticky note. Not bad for a quota. I didn't smile. I just folded it and kept it. Proof that sometimes you don't need applause to win the room. You just need to stay standing until they run out of reasons to push you down. The flight to Coronado felt like crossing into another country. Everything at Fort Oglethorpe had been slow, dusty, and half held together with duct tape and resentment. Coronado was sharp, fast, and humming with the kind of intensity that made people talk with clipped vowels and walk like they had somewhere more important to be. My assignment was to Naval Amphibious Space Operations, SEAL Logistics Support. Not glamorous, but crucial. It was the kind of job where if you screw up, a mission doesn't just fail, people die. And I knew the unspoken truth walking in. No one was going to trust a woman pushing paperwork, unless she did it so flawlessly that they couldn't afford not to. Day one. The chief petty officer glanced at my file, then at me and asked, "You sure you're not in the wrong place?" I told him I was right where I was assigned. He muttered something about peer stunts and waved me toward the supply cage. My official title was Operations Coordinator. Unofficially, I was a newbie with zero field cred, a tight bun, and a uniform to clean. The guys called me Icebox within the first week, not because I was cold, but because I didn't flinch, I didn't joke back, I didn't break. Every morning, I showed up 15 minutes before anyone else, reviewed requisition logs, flagged discrepancies, and sent my corrections to people who didn't want to read them. Then I sat through meetings where the men talked over each other and me, and occasionally forgot I was in the room. I answered questions only when asked. But when I did, I knew my stuff, fast, accurate, no filler. There's a thing that happens in environments like that. When you're quiet, they assume you're weak. Then you make one decision that saves their asses and suddenly you're not invisible. You're unavoidable. That moment came about 2 months in. One of the SEAL teams was gearing up for a pre-deployment training cycle, and the logistics for their loadout were a mess. Missing gear, misrouted crates, expired inventory sheets. It should have taken a week to untangle. I did it in 36 hours alone. Then restructured the entire ordering system so it wouldn't happen again. I didn't ask for permission, I just did it. The lieutenant in charge barely looked at me when I handed him the new chain. But 2 days later, when nothing got lost and every box landed where it was supposed to, he nodded once and said, "Nice work, Brennan." That was a promotion not on paper, but in tone. But respect is rented in places like that. Do it every day, do it in silence. I still had to prove it wasn't a fluke. Charlotte sent a gift box to the office around that time, cookies, a note, with her station logo on it and a little card that read, "Stay strong, little sis. Hope this job isn't too boring." I left the box in the common area. The guys ate it without asking where it came from. Someone said, "Your girlfriend's got nice handwriting." I didn't correct him. Week by week, I built a rhythm. I knew who double-counted ammo, who skipped chain of custody reports, who forged their commander's initials when they were late. I didn't snitch. I cleaned up their messes before they became problems. That was how you earned space in their world. One morning during gear inspection, a SEAL named Ramos called me ma'am without sarcasm. I almost missed it, but it landed. Things were shifting, still. Every win came with a cost. I missed my mom's memorial service that year. Charlotte sent pictures from the family gathering. Everyone looked color-coordinated and over-polished. I looked at the photos for 2 minutes tops, then filed them into the trash. I had sent flowers. I hadn't heard back. The base didn't care about my grief, or my sister, or the fact that I hadn't spoken to my father in 6 years. That was part of the draw. Honestly, the military didn't ask who you were when you arrived. It waited to see who you'd be under pressure. By the 6-month mark, I had a new desk closer to command, a recommendation from my lieutenant, and an unspoken agreement from most of the guys that I wasn't going anywhere. I'd earned my seat. Not loudly, not quickly, but entirely. Then came the orders for a joint operation off the coast of Yemen. It wasn't supposed to involve me directly. I was logistics, not boots on ground. But things don't always go to plan, especially in places where everything moves fast and silence carries the heaviest weight. The only reason I was even near the flight line that day was because the operations lead had forgotten to file a secondary manifest, and no one trusted the new kid with paperwork anymore except me. I caught the error, grabbed my clipboard, and jogged across the tarmac to intercept the crew loading the crates onto the Rongbird. That's when the call came in. A recon team had gone dark outside El Mikala. There were 6 operators, 1 drone. Tech, minimal support. What was supposed to be a quick terrain mapping mission had turned into a nightmare. A local militia splinter group intercepted their route. By the time command had a signal again, one SEAL was already wounded. They didn't have time to wait for the scheduled QRF. I wasn't even supposed to be in that room when the scramble started, but I was there, standing behind a comm sergeant, watching the map shift red, listening to the static-ridden voices of men I'd packed gear for, trained with, helped write meds for, now bleeding on a hillside in the middle of a country we weren't officially in. The officer on deck barked for available names. I stepped forward before I could think twice. He said, "You're logistics," I said. "I've trained with this team. I know their extraction codes, and I passed my weapons recall 3 weeks ago." He looked at me hard, then waved me in. That's how fast it was. We geared up, loaded in, and launched within 20 minutes. The desert at night is blacker than anything you'll ever see. It's not just darkness, it's a kind of silence that makes sound feel out of place. We dropped fast and dirty, no lights, no chatter, just boots hitting dirt and adrenaline screaming behind your ribs. They'd set up a makeshift cover between 2 abandoned supply trucks. 2 men were pinned, one of them badly hit in the leg, the other taking potshots to buy them seconds. I crawled the last 50 yards on my belly, sand in my mouth, blood in the air, bullets whining past my boots like angry bees. We had 30 seconds to either pull out or get shredded. I reached the wounded SEAL, Bryson, a kid, barely 24, dragged him with one arm while firing cover shots with the other. My shoulder dislocated somewhere in the pull. Didn't matter. I cinched a tourniquet around his thigh and shouted medevac coordinates to the air support team. The extraction bird hovered long enough to rattle our skulls. By the time we lifted off, I had 2 shrapnel wounds and a cracked rib. I refused the stretcher. Walked to the helipad myself. Bryson's blood still soaking through my uniform. The pilot looked at me and said, "Ma'am, you're leaking." I nodded, so I patched the hole. That's when they started calling me Iron Wing. After that, someone said it was because I never flinched, even under fire. Another guy said it was because I flew out of the sky like a pissed-off angel. I never asked for clarification. Nicknames stick the way scars do, uninvited, but earned. I spent 6 weeks in recovery back in Norfolk. They offered to pull me from duty rotation, said I needed rest. I said I'd rest when my arm worked again. I spent the next month in PT, pushing through every grimace, every nerve scream, until I could lift a crate without breaking form, not because I was trying to be tough, but because the alternative was fading into the background again. While I was off rotation, Charlotte went on television to honor the military. She wore a navy blue blazer, trotted out some buzzwords about sacrifice, then pivoted into a monologue about strong female voices in civilian leadership. She never said my name, but she showed a photo of me from Annapolis during the segment, cropped so my uniform and name tag were out of frame. I watched it from the rec room, still wearing a compression sleeve and smelling faintly of antiseptic. I turned the television off halfway through. One of the guys, Ramos again, looked over and asked, "You know her?" I said, "Not anymore." That's how it worked with Charlotte. She could stand next to you while cutting you out of the picture. She didn't need to lie, she just made sure the story fit her lens. But none of that mattered when I walked back into the logistics bay 2 weeks later, and the team stood up without being told, just briefly, just enough. One guy nodded and said, "Glad you're back, Iron Wing." That was it. Respect in the military doesn't come in speeches. It comes in silence, doors held open without orders, coffee left on your desk without names, eyes that don't look through you anymore. I wasn't special. I was just steady, the one who showed up, the one who didn't miss, the one who ran toward the fire and brought someone out. The next rotation was already posted, my name was on the list. This time, no one questioned it. I hadn't been stateside more than 2 weeks before her name showed up again, this time in my inbox. Subject line, quick collab, opportunity, media feature, sender, Day Brand Review and Company. The collab was her way of saying, "I already pitched your story to a producer, and they want me to frame it." She wanted to highlight women in command roles for an upcoming docuseries. On public broadcasting, nothing serious, nothing too war heavy, just enough medals to look inspiring, not so many it scared suburban moms. She wrote, "Think lean, but with commo." I'd love to sit down and sister source the tone. I didn't respond. 2 days later, the producer emailed me directly, said Charlotte spoke so passionately about my career, and that they'd be honored to have me featured as a segment, not a subject, not a guest, segment asterisk. Like I was a piece of footage they could drop between commercial breaks. I declined politely, but firmly. I wasn't mad, I'd just seen this pattern before. Charlotte didn't want to tell my story. She wanted to tell her version of my story. Back in high school, she once submitted a short story to a statewide writing competition. It was titled My Sister, A Study in Quiet Strength. I remember reading it in the school paper. It was a beautifully written piece of fiction that sounded suspiciously like a eulogy for someone still alive. She described me as stoic, background, reliable, and then compared me to a folding chair at Thanksgiving, always there, never noticed, holds up the weight but never gets asked to dance. Even back then, I could hear her voice behind the compliments. So when she posted the teaser trailer for the docuseries 2 weeks later, I wasn't surprised. She'd gone ahead without me. The segment opened with a slow pan of women saluting, then cut to Charlotte standing in a minimalist studio, talking about my sister, the Admiral, as if I were an abstract idea. She never used my name, she didn't have to. She just said things like, "Some women lead with vision, others with silence, my sister." She does both, and I've always tried to bring her story to light. Like I was some artifact she dug out of storage. The worst part wasn't the footage. It was the people who started reaching out afterward. Old college acquaintances, former neighbors, even my 3rd grade teacher, all messaging to say how proud they were after watching Charlotte's piece. Not because of me, but because of how she had told it. And Charlotte, she sent a follow-up email. No subject line, just one sentence. "See? We made a great team." That week, I was up at Fort Dalton overseeing a transitional training module for incoming junior officers. One of the guys from SEAL Team 5 pulled me aside. Big guy, heavy accent, 3 deployments deep. He said his sister once tried to take credit for a foundation he started after coming back from Fallujah. I asked what he did about it. He said, "Nothing, I just kept building the damn thing. It stuck with me." I didn't respond to Charlotte's email, but I did respond with action. One submitted my own internal proposal to Navy Command, quietly, through the right chain, for a mentorship initiative aimed at female enlisted candidates. Nothing flashy, just structure. Access. 6 weeks later, it was approved. I started spending every Thursday night at the base learning center. No cameras, no press. Just 3 or 4 women at a time sitting across from someone who'd been through the grinder and was still standing. One night, a young corporal named Jana asked if I had siblings. I said, yes. She asked what she did. I paused and said, media. She tells stories for a living. Jana smiled. That's funny. You kind of do, too. You just use different tools. It wasn't meant to be deep, but it landed. Because while Charlotte was on NPR describing my leadership in poetic half sentences, I was teaching 19-year-olds how to read tactical terrain and hold a perimeter without panicking. I didn't need a spotlight, I needed a damn working flashlight, and for once, I had it. And just when I thought I'd finally found a rhythm that made sense, the notification started lighting up on my phone like a bad omen. The first text said, "Ma'am, it's Corporal Briers, just checking if this email is real." It came at 17 a.m. I was still up sorting through intake reports for the mentorship program. I had no idea who Briers was, but something about the timing didn't feel random. I replied, "Go ahead and forward it, I'll confirm." What he sent was a PDF attachment. The subject line read, "Final note, Tyler J. Rowan." Tyler had been one of ours, a SEAL candidate. Passed every physical threshold we threw at him. Sharp mind, sharper instincts. Barely 24, I hadn't seen his name in months. Not since his last performance evaluation. But the report hit like cold water. He took his own life at home. No note left for his parents. No letter to a friend. But in a secure draft folder on his old base email account, they found something. Just a few lines saved, but never sent. "I know Admiral Brennan doesn't know who I am. But she changed the way I thought about this place. When she spoke, I didn't feel like a mistake. That meant something. Please tell her thank you." No punctuation, no sign-off. I sat back completely still. There was no right protocol for something like that. You don't call their family. You don't forward the message to the chaplain. You just read it and carry it. I printed a copy, folded it once, slid it into the front pocket of my uniform binder, right behind the first deployment orders I ever signed. The next morning, I walked into the command office and requested an emergency review of the SEAL mental fitness structure. You'd think after 20 years, the Navy would have nailed this. But what we had was a scattered checklist and a pamphlet with a hotline that half the uni didn't trust. I wasn't interested in therapy brochures. I wanted human contact, monthly check-ins, scheduled and enforced, one-on-one sit-downs, not checkboxes. The paperwork pushback was instant. Logistics, manpower, risk assessment, everything but logic. But I kept going because I wasn't doing this for a system. I was doing it for a kid I never really knew, but who for one moment thought I saw him. And apparently others felt it too, that week. Two more anonymous notes found their way into my inbox. One was scribbled on the back of a torn cafeteria schedule and scanned. The other was typed in courier font like someone was scared to attach their real writing style. Both said the same thing: "Thanks for saying it out loud in that training room. We didn't know anyone saw us, no names, no ranks, just echoes." I shared them with no one except for Lieutenant Jack Baines, my second in command, and one of the few people I trusted to call me out when I was being too polite for my own good. He read both messages, handed them back without a word, then said, "We're losing more to silence than to combat. That's a leadership failure, not yours. There's real work here." So, we started building something under the radar. We called it Operation Glasshouse. Weekly peer-led check-ins, no command structure, no salutes, just a room, coffee, a closed door, and honesty. We made it opt-in. Then quietly made sure every team leader opted in first. By month 3, participation was at 84%. There were no selfies, no tweets, just people breathing easier. Charlotte, meanwhile, posted a video of herself at a panel in San Diego talking about the emotional resilience of women in leadership, with my image blurred behind her on a slideshow. She captioned it, "Proud to be related to this legacy." I didn't even flinch this time. I started to understand something. The loudest people weren't always the ones leading. They were just holding the mic. Real leadership, the kind that changed outcomes, not just optics, usually happened in rooms with bad lighting and dented mugs. Like the one I walked into on a Thursday night and found Corporal Avalon waiting. She stood when I entered, said, "You probably don't remember me, but you yelled at my squad last winter for losing track of formation timing during storm drills." I nodded, "Sounds about right." She smiled. That was the first time I realized someone expected me to get it right, not just survive. We sat, talked, nothing deep, just real. And it was enough. The binder with Tyler's notes stayed in my office drawer after that, unopened, but always nearby, not as a symbol of loss, but as a reminder of how little it takes to be remembered for showing up. And when the memo from SEAL Command landed on my desk, requesting I take over direct oversight of SEAL Team 9, the only thing I thought of wasn't the rank or the logistics or even the new ops tempo. It was the fact that I now had a seat at the exact table that used to ignore people like Tyler, and I had no plans to waste it. The first time I stood in front of SEAL Team 9, nobody clapped. It wasn't cold. It wasn't disrespect. It was calculation. I wasn't what they expected, especially not for command. They looked at me like I was there to pass time, not orders. That didn't bother me. What did was how quietly they kept their distance. Not one asked about my record. Not one challenged my leadership face to face. They were waiting for failure, for permission to ignore me. So I gave them none. The base of Fort Miramar wasn't much. Just a converted training compound with gear that still smelled like 2009. The first order I gave wasn't strategic, it was structural. I ordered the break room remodeled. That's how I knew who was paying attention. Anyone who groaned about wasted budget didn't understand what I was doing. Culture comes before combat readiness, and a team that doesn't sit together won't bleed together. Week 1. I cancelled to pre-scheduled war games and replaced them with unannounced night ops across the hills behind the training zone. I told them, we're not here to rehearse victory. We're here to find the first person who panics under pressure. That person wasn't who they thought. It was Lieutenant Brian Niss, a 12-year vet to combat citations. Looked like a walking recruitment poster, but his flashlight battery died in the ridge, and he lost his bearings. For a full 22 minutes, didn't call it in, froze. He showed up at my office the next morning, expecting to be benched. I told him, you're staying, and next drill, you're leading because now you know the feeling. And that means you'll watch out for it in others. That was the first crack in the wall. After that, the silence started to shift. I didn't try to be one of them. I didn't eat with them or joke with them during briefings, but I was always visible. I watched every exercise. I walked the perimeter instead of writing it. I showed up before they did and left after. The nickname started about 2 months in. Not in public, just among the squad leads. Iron hand, I heard it once, half-whispered. Behind me during debrief, I pretended not to catch it, but it stuck. We ran to full-scale joint op simulations at quarter, 0 serious injuries. Highest overall evaluation score in the region. SEAL Command took notice, so did the men. One night after a late post-op report review, Chief Sandival knocked on my door. I thought it was paperwork. Instead, he sat across from me and said, permission to speak freely. Ma'am? I nodded. You run us hard, some think too hard, but nobody questions if you'd show up when it gets real. He didn't wait for an answer. He just stood, saluted, and left. A week later, a former squad leader named Hamlin sent a transfer request, specifically requesting reassignment under my command. It was the first of 8. The request form started stacking. Men with prior conflicts, disciplinary flags, or just reputations for being difficult. They weren't looking for a soft landing. They were looking for someone who didn't flinch when things cracked open. I didn't take all of them, but I reviewed every name, and when I built the new rotation schedule for deployment prep, I did something nobody expected. I asked for volunteers to join a separate platoon. Cross-branch trained, fast response, attached to disaster relief and recovery when not deployed. High impact, low glory work, 10 hands went up, that was all I needed. SEAL Team 9 started changing, not from the top down, but from the inside out. The men trained differently, talked differently, not softer, but sharper. Like they were done proving something to each other and ready to move with purpose. Meanwhile, Charlotte published a piece in a national magazine titled, The Cost of Hypermasculinity in Modern Warfare. She used photos from our ops deck without clearance. Claimed an anonymous source had given her insight into military emotional dysfunction. I didn't issue a statement. Instead, I sent a secure message to every team member. It read, there's what people say about us, and there's what we build together. Only one will still be standing a decade from now. That week, Chief Sandival handed me a box. Inside was a hand-stitched uni patch. It wasn't regulation, but the emblem was clear, a lightning bolt across the hand in salute, and beneath it, never small again, no explanation, no speech. I had it sewn to the inside lining of my jacket where no one could see it. But I always felt it when I moved. That's the thing with real leadership. It's not about who claps. It's about who follows, even when no one's watching. Miles Corwin didn't knock when he walked into my world. He emailed. Technically, it was a security request. Standard protocol for a joint cybersecurity readiness audit. He was part of a civilian task force from the Defense Intelligence Directorate, flagged for a week-long interagency evaluation at Miramar. I scanned the memo, filed it with the usual stack of red tape, and didn't think about it again until the morning he showed up at my desk with a coffee I hadn't asked for and a question I didn't expect. Why do your internal firewalls mirror legacy naval schema from 2008? He asked. I looked up. Civilians usually open with a handshake or small talk. He led with a systems critique, ballsy. Because 2008 schema still blocks everything 2021's. Leak, I said. He smirked and replied, that's the first honest answer I've gotten all week. Miles didn't dress like government. Button-downs with rolled sleeves, no tie, wireframe glasses. He pushed them up his nose when he was annoyed. But he had the kind of presence that filled a room without stepping forward. He was quiet in the way people are when they know exactly how loud they could be. Over the next 5 days, we argued over for policies, rewrote 3 compliance protocols, and accidentally shut down half our shared drives for 4 hours during a patch test. I expected frustration. He brought pizza and fixed it in 22 minutes. He didn't ask me personal questions. He asked operational ones. How do you manage morale when you can't promise rotation dates? What do you do when your team screws up publicly but recovers privately? He wasn't flirting. He was studying leadership. By Thursday, I caught myself staying a few minutes longer in the briefing room, just to hear him talk about layered security logic like it was poetry. By Friday, he asked if I ever took a lunch break that wasn't protein bars at my desk. I told him, only when someone proves they understand the chain of command. He said, good. Because I already asked your XO and he told me you're due for an actual sandwich. So, we ate outside on a bench overlooking the southern fence line. We didn't talk about rank or clearance. He asked me what book my mom had read to me the most as a kid. I told him Dickinson. Wild Nights, Wild Nights. He said his mom was more of a Steinbeck woman. Discipline without love is cruelty when he left that Sunday. He didn't push, just handed me a sticky note with his number and wrote, if you ever want to audit something other than firewalls, I didn't call, not right away. But 2 weeks later, he sent me a PDF of a protocol rewrite he modeled off our conversation. The subject line said, stolen your logic, feel free to press charges. I replied with 2 words, request granted. The back and forth turned into calls. The calls turned into dinner when I was in DC for a briefing. Dinner turned into something I didn't know how to label, quiet companionship, consistent respect. The rare feeling that I didn't have to modulate myself down to be understood. Miles never once asked me to soften. He didn't flinch when I told him about lost men, missed calls, injuries I still felt in my spine some mornings. Instead, he said, I don't love what you do. I love how you do it. That's what matters. We didn't move fast. We moved deliberately. He didn't show up with flowers or speeches. He showed up with clarity. Like the night I got back from a 10-day training op, too exhausted to unlock my front door. He was already there, lights dimmed, stove on, reading a file on military civilian integration policies. He looked up and said, I figured you'd want protein, not small talk. I sat on the couch and watched him stir something in a skillet, and realized this man would never ask me to be smaller. He didn't care about my title. He didn't want to wear it like a badge. He wanted to walk beside it the moment I knew it wasn't just connection, but permanence was during a conversation that lasted under 30 seconds. I told him about a young lieutenant who cracked under pressure in a live ops. He listened, then said, you taught him how to survive. Who taught ***? I didn't answer. He didn't press. Instead, he said, if you ever want to stop being the one who always holds the line, I'm here. Not to rescue, just to hold the other side. No declaration, no drama, just presence. That was the night I looked at him and said, if you ever propose to me, do it like that, quiet, steady, no fireworks. He smiled, leaned back and said, good. Because I already ruled out skywriters. There wasn't a single moment when Miles won me over. He didn't have to. He just stayed when most people blinked. He listened when others performed. And more than anything, he knew something nobody else had ever said out loud. I wasn't hard to love. I was hard to fake it with, and that meant he didn't try. The box arrived on a Tuesday. No return address, no card, just a carefully folded ivory white dress uniform, pressed flat and still warm from the cleaner's steam. My name was stitched above the pocket, rank insignia polished to a shine, shoes wrapped separately. Inside the inner lining of the coat, someone had tucked a note. You stood for everyone else. Now, let us stand with you. It wasn't from Miles. He'd already asked, quiet, simple, no kneeling. Just a coffee mugs and a question in the kitchen. What do you think about doing life officially? I said yes without blinking. We planned something small. Local courthouse, 24 guests. Light lunch afterward, no spectacle, no staged emotion, just people who mattered. But then Charlotte called. She started with pleasantries, asked about venue details, dates. If I'd chosen a florist. Then came the line, I know you're probably doing the whole stoic uniform thing. I cut her off. Yes, Charlotte, I am wearing the uniform. She gave a tight laugh. Well, I just think you might want to consider something more inviting. You? No. To make people feel less like they're at a funeral. I didn't respond. I knew that tone. It was her polite way of saying, don't embarrass me. She wasn't even invited, not officially. The RSVP email bounced. The last communication we'd had before that call was a forwarded link to her TEDx talk about feminine resilience in boardrooms. She'd used my photo again. This time with a voiceover about invisible women rising through hard structures. She didn't ask for permission. She just built her brand and used my shadow for contrast. 2 days after that phone call, she tweeted it. White background, bold black font, her face in the top right corner. Text overlaid on an image of a dress uniform. Nothing screams marrying for control. Like a woman showing up to her own wedding in government-tissued fabric. Hashtag ills. It landed at 9:14 a.m. By 9:23, it had over 5,000 likes. By noon, it was on Instagram. A few gossip accounts picked it up, mocking the Britazilla with combat boots. Some of the comments were worse than the tweet. Guests love memes. Never having to wear heels. Is this the military's version of cosplay? Imagine saluting your wife instead of kissing her. They didn't know who I was. Didn't know what those stripes meant, or the blood it cost to earn them. I didn't say a word publicly. Neither did Miles. He just slid my phone off the table, set it face down and asked, "Red or white with dinner?" But others did speak. It started small. A comment thread under a Navy spouses forum, then a stitched video by a former Marine. On TikTok reading my service record line by line, ending with, "She doesn't need to explain. That uniform is a reason you get to mock her in peace." By midnight, the hashtag flipped. Hashtag Admiral bride, hashtag salute vest dress, hashtag Iron Wing wedding. But none of that mattered compared to what showed up the next morning, one by one. Letters started arriving, not DMIS, not tweets, letters, handwritten, folded carefully, sent to the base. Sealed with tape and reverence. A young girl from Iowa wrote, "My brother says girls can't be Navy. But I saw your picture, and now I'm going to be Ironheart." A retired sailor sent a ribbon bar from his first deployment with a note, "I never had a daughter. But if I did, I'd want her to walk down the aisle like you." Even a few active duty members, who'd never served with me, reached out quietly through back channels. "If you ever need a row filled, I got the dress whites ready." That's when the emails started coming, not from the public, from the men I had trained. Served beside lead, SEALs, Marines, corpsmen, even logistics officers I hadn't seen in 8 years. Each one said the same thing in their own way: "Tell us where and when," not because of Charlotte, not out of spite, but because the uniform didn't just represent service. It represented a truth some people didn't want to acknowledge: that you can lead with grace and still wear steel. That honor isn't gendered. That sometimes the strongest walk down the aisle not in lace, but in legacy. I didn't respond to Charlotte's tweet, I didn't repost, I didn't rebut. But I did send one reply. Not to her, to everyone else. I posted a single photo of the uniform. Box, pressed and perfect, caption with 7 words, "This is what earn looks like." Then I closed the app. There was still a wedding to plan. And apparently a guest list that was about to get much, much larger. The first to arrive was Master Chief Eric Donnelly, 12 years out to hip surgeries, and still the only man I knew who could make a full room shut up just by raising an eyebrow. He walked into the chapel the morning of the ceremony, holding a white envelope with my name on it, and said, "Got your 6, Admiral." No fanfare, no announcement, just that. Then came Tyler Keys, who once took a bullet in Panama and refused morphine because it slows my math, followed by Lieutenant Sam Brickhouse Reyes, who once deadlifted a submerged engine block to save. To divers, then more, dozens, then over 100 by 11 o'clock hours. Chapel staff were scrambling to open the side wings for overflow. I stood in the back prep room, staring at myself in the mirror. Full dress whites, shoes shined, medals aligned. No veil, no makeup beyond what the Navy's grooming regs allowed. I was still me, only cleaner, only steadier. Miles was already in position near the altar. No groomsman, just him. A dark navy suit, polished shoes, and a quiet confidence. He didn't ask how many people had shown up, didn't need to. He knew. At 12:50 my phone buzzed, a message. No contact saved, but I knew that number. "You're really going through with it in uniform, disgraceful." I didn't blink, didn't delete it. Just stared at it the way you look at a scratch on glass, unavoidable, but irrelevant. Then I turned the phone over and slid it into the inside pocket of my uniform. 2 men stood beside me. Senior Chief Gavin Ford and Petty Officer Liam Troze. Both had once crawled through a burning structure to pull me out. After an intel operation in Djibouti went sideways. "I owe them my spine." "Literally," Ford said. "You still want us flanking you," I said. "I don't need it," Troze grinned. "That's why you're getting it." The organ began. The chapel door stayed shut a few more seconds as the congregation rose. And then came the call. Deep, crisp, firm, "Admiral on deck." I hadn't planned it. I hadn't asked for it. But when those doors opened to 100 SEALs, Marines, corpsmen, and a smattering of Army and Air Force, uniformed, decorated, weathered by time, stood in unison. Not by command, by choice, their hands rose to brows. White gloves, steel posture, silent thunder. No music played, just boots striking floors. I walked down the aisle between men and women who had carried out orders with my name attached to them, who had held fast under fire because I had told them to hold, who had returned home because I'd fought to get them there. Ford and Troze at my sides, we passed the pews row by row. Some I hadn't seen in a decade, some I never expected to see again. But they were all there, some scarred, some limping, Some clean-shaven, some bearded and wild, but every one of them stood for me, not the rank, not the medals, me. Halfway down the aisle, I caught eyes with Rear Admiral Lee Barker, my first mentor from Officer Development School. She gave me the smallest nod, one that said, "Now they see what I saw." I kept walking, spine locked, chin level, no smile, no tears, just presence. At the altar, Miles stood, hands folded behind his back, standing at ease, no grin, no nerves, just absolute understanding. The chaplain was Lieutenant Commander Rupert Langley, a Navy lifer with a Boston accent and a broken wrist he never fixed. He gave us a nod, opened his binder and began. But no one sat. Not at first, because when the last echo of Admiral on deck died down, it left something else behind, reverence. We didn't start with vows. We started with silence, or in silence, and when Langley did begin, his voice was low, steady. He spoke of commitment, not just to each other, but to duty, to purpose, to choosing every single day to protect what mattered, whether that was a nation or a marriage. Our vows didn't mention sickness or health, richer or poorer. Mine were, "I will never ask you to shrink." His were, "I will never ask you to stop." We promised to protect peace, to make space for stillness, and to sharpen each other without dulling our joy. There was no "you complete me," we were already whole. Then came the moment. Langley said, "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you." And before he could finish, a sound rose. It wasn't applause, not yet. It was the collective sound of 200 chairs creaking as warriors sat down in quiet unison, no chaos, no pomp, just the shift of bodies and fabric like a living exhale. We kissed, brief, steady, then turned. A saber arch waited at the exit, not made by officers, but by enlisted, every blade lifted by hands that had once held rifles under my command. As we walked through it, I caught sight of the last row. A man stood alone outside, visible through the rear window, rigid posture, dress blues, arms behind his back. He didn't come inside, but he came. And that somehow registered like a crack under the surface. But I didn't stop walking. I just stepped through the blades into sunlight that didn't burn, just clarified. The reception was held in a hangar-turned-banquet hall on base. Nothing fancy, just long tables, folding chairs, and people who didn't need floral centerpieces. To feel something, the chow line stretched around the corner, heavy on barbecue, light on pretense. Nobody clinked glasses or gave toasts with polished speeches. They just came up one by one, said what they needed to say, and left behind handshakes. That felt like anchors. At some point after the third plate of brisket and someone's off-key acoustic cover of Simple Man, I stepped outside. My dress whites were still flawless, but my hair had started to come undone in the breeze. I didn't care. It felt good not to care for once. The air was cool. Spring in North Carolina always had that sharp edge of salt from the coast. I stood by a railing overlooking the field where we'd held morning drills. Quiet now. Just crickets and the low hum of base generators in the distance. That's when Petty Officer Miller approached, big guy, tattooed sleeves, broke his hand once, punching through a steel hatch because someone was trapped inside. He stood next to me for a minute before saying, "I didn't salute you today because you're an admiral. I did it because when my brother died, you sat in the hallway with me for 6 hours, and said nothing." I didn't answer, just reached over, squeezed his shoulder. Then he walked off. People came and went in waves, some shared memories. Some didn't say a word. Others gave me side glances, small nods, gestures that carried weight in the way only silence can. A few brought up my mom. No one mentioned Charlotte, but I knew she had been there. I hadn't seen her face in the chapel, hadn't expected to. But I caught the unmistakable shape of her hair in the last row, tucked in a seat far enough back to vanish if you blinked. She hadn't stayed. She never does. At midnight, after the crowd thinned and Miles was busy corralling someone's wild toddler from crawling onto the cake table, I went back to my quarters. I peeled off my uniform one layer at a time, each medal and button landing on the desk like a quiet punctuation mark. Then I checked my phone. No new message from my father, but one email had come in. No subject line, no signature, just a plain white field of text. "They stood because you made space for them, too. You never raised your voice. You raised their worth, and I saw that today. Finally. I'm sorry I laughed when you said you wanted this life. I see now. It was never about chasing our approval. It was about leading without needing it. We don't salute blood, we salute truth. See, no love, Charlotte, no emojis, no plea for a reunion." But I read it 3 times, and the part that stuck wasn't the apology. It was the line about truth. Truth doesn't demand forgiveness. It demands recognition. And maybe, just maybe, she'd started to recognize something in me that had always been there, but never fit her version of worthy. I didn't respond, I didn't forward it, I just left it there. Later that night, Miles curled up beside me on the couch. He smelled like soap and bourbon, and a touch of strawberry cake someone had smeared on his shirt. During a hug, he asked, "Did your dad ever text again?" I shook my head. Then he said, "Did it matter?" I looked out the window where the base lights reflected off the tarmac. A place that had once felt like a battlefield now felt like a border I crossed. "No," I said, "not the way it used to," and I meant it. The first thing I noticed from the stage wasn't the lights. It was the weight of 100 cadets sitting straighter when I stepped up. The auditorium at Fort Hayden had that same government issue. Blandness, beige walls, retractable seating. Ceiling tiles probably older than most of the recruits in the front row. But the air had that low buzz of eyes, waiting to see if the person with 4 stars on her shoulder was just another Sue reading off a teleprompter. I wasn't here to lecture, I didn't bring a PowerPoint. I brought a notebook with 2 words scribbled across the top. Remember them. This wasn't a conference, it was a quiet reckoning. When they introduced me, the room clapped, polite and restrained. Not because they didn't care, but because no one really knew how to respond to a female flag officer who didn't walk in swinging. Abe out of rank, I didn't mind. I wasn't here to be liked, I was here to be honest. I started by telling them about Sergeant Alan Ree, the instructor who didn't show up for morning formation, and whose locker was found full of unmailed birthday cards and a single note with my name on it. Then I told them about Lieutenant Priya N., who got pushed out for emotional volatility when all she did was file a harassment report. Her superior didn't want seen. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just told the truth that leadership wasn't about medals or authority. It was about seeing people before they disappeared, about asking the hard questions when no one else would, about creating a culture where toughness didn't mean silence, and professionalism didn't mean pretending you're invincible. The room was still. Then I said something I hadn't planned. Respect doesn't always salute you, sometimes it watches to see if you stand anyway. And that's when I saw her, second row from the back. Sunglasses tucked into her blouse, hair longer now, subtler makeup. But there was no mistaking her, Charlotte Brennan, my sister. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just looked straight ahead like everyone else, hands folded in her lap. I don't even know how long she'd been there. I kept going. Talked about how we rewrote the post-deployment protocols at Norfolk, how we included family reintegration counseling, whether the cost liked it or not, how the suicide rate in our unit dropped 37% over 2 years. No one clapped for that. But I saw heads nod, and then I closed with the truth that stuck in my throat, more than any war story ever did. My mother once told me storms weren't meant to stay grounded. I've tried to live by that. But what I've learned more than anything, what I want every single cadet in this room to remember is this: you do not lead by being louder. You lead by listening longer and showing up again and again, especially when it's easier to walk away. I stepped back from the mic. The applause didn't erupt. It rose slow, not polite, not obligated. It came from somewhere deeper than protocol. And the first person on their feet was Charlotte. No dramatics, no gasp. Just her rising from the second to last row like it was the most natural thing in the world. And then one by one, the room followed. She didn't mouth, "I'm sorry," she didn't say anything. But she clapped hard with both hands, and I didn't cry, not then. Because for the first time in my life, my sister wasn't looking down at me or past me. She was looking directly at me on my terms, and that was enough. Charlotte's applause didn't change my life, but it changed the air in the auditorium. For the first time, I wasn't the one bridging the silence. Someone else stood up and met me halfway. That night, I didn't replay the moment like a victory. I treated it like a weather report. Something quiet had shifted. A high-pressure system finally moved on. 2 weeks later, I got the call from the Department of Defense. They were greenlighting the overhaul initiative we've been pitching for years. Joint operations reform, mental resilience integration, ethical command training from the ground up. And they wanted me to lead it. They didn't ask for a consultant, they asked for oversight, for vision, for a blueprint that could hold weight long after I retired. I didn't hesitate, I said yes. The first site we visited was Fort Burwell, a place I hadn't stepped foot in since my first deployment. Back then, I was a junior officer assigned to a team that didn't believe in women in charge, unless it was a joke. Now, I walked into that same hangar wearing 4 stars. The senior chief at the gate saluted before I even reached him. Inside, the whiteboards were full of new training modules I'd written. The instructors were fresh-faced, open-eyed, eager, but grounded. I walked past one classroom where a young woman in dessert camo was leading a briefing on operational stress mitigation. Her voice was steady, confident, and sharp. She turned slightly when she saw me through the window. Her name tag read Patterson. Avery, I blinked. That name had weight. After the session, she came up to me. Didn't stumble over her words or try to impress me. My dad was Corporal Nick Patterson. You pulled him out of a wreck off Mogadishu. He said you saved more than his life that day. He named me after you. I didn't know what to say. I just shook her hand and she gripped mine like she meant it. That's what stays. The names that get passed down not out of tradition, but out of impact. The leadership that echoes beyond your command. I traveled base to base for the next 6 months, watching the new model come to life. Units that used to burn out their people now had embedded mental health officers. Evaluations included not just tactical metrics, but leadership empathy scores. Soldiers who'd never been listened to before now had a channel to speak up without risking their career. At Camp Monroe, a second lieutenant pulled me aside after a seminar. "Ma'am," he said, "I didn't think I belonged here until I read your training doctrine. I thought I was soft. Turns out I was just human." I told him that's the hardest thing, to be in uniform. And then came the message from the White House. I'd been nominated for the Department of Defense's Excellence in Ethical Command Award. I wasn't sure I wanted it. Titles felt small after all this, but I accepted. The ceremony was hosted at the National Defense Auditorium in Arlington. Packed house. Officers, civilians, cadets, brass. Miles sat in the front row. So did someone else. My father. He didn't sit tall like he used to. His shoulders were a little slouched, his hair thinner. But he wore a gray suit. Not his uniform, no medals, no ribbons, just himself. He stood when I walked on stage. So did half the room. The applause was fast, loud, and unrelenting. But it wasn't the clapping that stuck. It was the moment I looked right at him. And he didn't look away. When I reached the podium, I didn't start with a quote or a joke. I just said, "We can't control how we're raised. We can only choose how we lead," and I meant it. After the ceremony, I walked outside into the warm spring air. A line of cadets waited to shake my hand, and I greeted them one by one. Some gave salutes, some gave smiles, a few even gave thanks. And then he stepped forward. My father. He didn't speak right away, just took off his cap, held out his hand. "I'm proud of you," he said. Then quieter, "And I'm sorry it took me so long." I nodded. Not because it erased anything, not because I needed it, but because truth, when it finally arrives, doesn't have to be dramatic, it just has to be real. That night, Miles and I ate leftover Thai food at home, our boots by the door, his tie undone. I sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through my inbox. A message from a former SEAL blinked at the top. "Still thinking about your wedding, ma'am? Never seen that many tough guys cry in one room." I smiled. Showed it to Miles. He read it. Then asked, "You going to write back?" I typed some salutes. "Stay with you longer than silence ever did." Then I turned off the phone, leaned back in my chair, and let the quiet settle. Because in the end, revenge didn't look like payback. It looked like policy change. It looked like my sister standing up, my father reaching across decades. It looked like a young cadet named Avery Patterson taking the oath in boots I once filled. And it felt like this, like standing tall so others know it's possible. And maybe that's the real victory. When you no longer need the people who doubted you to admit they were wrong. You just need them to see that you're still standing. That the things they laughed at built the life they couldn't imagine. Not louder, just stronger. Not bitter, just unshakable. Because in the end, the loudest revenge isn't noise, it's proof.